Welcome, guys, to Join the Journey podcast with your hosts, Amy and Connie,
where we'll talk about life experiences, hope to motivate, and talk about what success means to us. But keep in mind, we haven't made it yet. So stay tuned.
What's up, Join the Journey fam? Today we have Mr. Luwin and Connie, as always.
Hello.
So, Luwin, today we're going to talk about how you lead with impact in everything that you do in your daily life.
No, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Bug.
I know. I'm really excited. I don't really know Luwin. I know you from Amy pretty much because you guys used to work together, correct?
Yeah. So we met through, and if you've watched our episodes in the past, I've mentioned it. That's what I used to do, and that's how we met. We met because he's in intensive services there, and so Luwin, tell us a little bit about your job there and your roles.
Yeah, so it's a community mental health agency. It's a nonprofit and located throughout the San Gabriel Valley. But specifically, myself and my team, we work specifically with at-risk foster youth all over LA County. And so the unique thing is that we're not based out of an office. We actually are field-based. So we go out and meet with the kiddos in their community. So most of the kids that we work with are in the foster care system. They're bouncing around from different foster homes, group homes, and shelters. And my team and I go out there and just try to kind of stabilize them and kind of keep them in one place to kind of really, so they can find some stability and do some,
And what made you get into this field and line of work?
It was a challenge. It was a really interesting journey. I think growing up, going through high school as I was applying to college, I did feel a lot of the Asian stereotypes. When I actually, right, when I actually started college, I did my undergrad at UCLA. My first 2 years, I was pre-med, molecular bio major, so like stereotypical, right?
That's why I'm laughing because oh my gosh,
they can relate, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but it was really funny because early on, within like the first 2-3 quarters, I kind of knew like this wasn't really the path for me. And I remember one specific moment, it was in like a life science class, and I was sitting there with my roommate, and he was like, "Oh, did you start studying for the midterm yet?" And I was like, "What? This, like, we're in week 2. Like, who cares about the midterm right now?" And I felt the tap on my back. I turned around and it was another student, and she said, "I care about the midterm." And I was like, "Oh, wow." So that's like kind of like, you know what? Maybe I'm not as cutthroat or like as invested. But I also stuck through it though for another year and a half. I think there's a part of me that was kind of like, just in case.
Yeah.
Or maybe that was stubborn and I was like, you know what, let me make sure that, I could prove to myself like I could have if I kind of wanted to. And I was kind of pulling decent grades, but I was like, at the end of the day, I was like, I can't be a half-assed doctor. Like you don't want to be, you want to really do it if you really want to do it. So I didn't want all those science classes to go to waste though. So I thought about like, oh, what else can I do? So I ended up like, oh, I like people. People are interesting. So I switched my major to psychology and then picked up a public policy minor. And it was when I picked up that minor that I really kind of got interested in this field, in, social welfare and that kind of stuff. I had a really impactful professor. I think when you hear stories of people like, oh, this is kind of what, got me into this field, there's always like 1 or 2 people that are like really
resonate with that person.
Exactly. So she was a little firecracker, older Jewish lady, and she like worked with the gangs in South LA. So for her classes, we had to do a lot of field work, going out there, joining, participating in community group meetings and that kind of stuff. And I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of cool. So that's kind of why I kind of got into this field. I mean, took a little couple detours, I think, in life, as sometimes we do.
Yeah.
But in just thinking about how much I love connecting with people and how I love and find so much joy from helping people.
Yeah. That's really neat.
Yeah. I think that really describes who he really is and carries that throughout his daily life, right? Because during this time you deal with them, you oh my God. You you really keep your composure during any intensive situation, right? I remember this time where, one of the clients had a really powerful moment, right? Something really had to go in their feelings where you kept your composure to calm them down. And how do you find that balance, Luwin, to bring that energy to someone else? because they have to feel, comfortable with you. So how did you gain them in that way?
I think so much of it too comes from just life experience and also recognizing or just kicking into like a problem solving mode, right? Where inside I might be freaking out,
Yeah.
but it's one of those things where if I freak out on the outside, it's not going to help anything. Like we can't have two or three people freaking out at the same time, right?
Correct.
Only like let's have one person freak out and then the rest of us try to help. So I think just kind of compartmentalizing, almost like putting the emotion part aside and just trying to figure out how do I help this person in this moment. I think like God has given us a lot of blessings and talents and gifts, and it's about how we use them. So it's about like caring, but also kind of figuring out like, hey, how do I keep them safe? How do I get them to a place where they can really get help? Sometimes it's just about like putting out fires. I think the incident that Amy was talking about, we had a kiddo that was just in a really bad place, and she was running the streets and just really escalated. And it's just about like, how do we keep her safe? Can I stay close to her as she's jaywalking across the street while we're waiting for the police, that kind of stuff.
So, Luwin, that's amazing that you can, put yourself in that position and just, take care of another person during that time. I'm sure these people are going through a lot. And so, what is the age groups that you usually deal with during, in this field?
Yeah. So anywhere, the youngest I had is 2 years old and all the way up to 20 or 21 years old. So a huge range. I mean, literally like from a toddler to a full grown adult. So
May I ask what type of situations are these children or youth dealing with? I know just overall social work, right? You either deal with like criminals, like you said, like gangs or stuff like that. But in your instance, in your line of work, what kind of I don't even know how to say it properly, but I guess problematic situations do you normally find the kids in? I know that there could be like domestic violence and things like that, right? But does it ever extend any further than that?
yeah, so the kids that come through, the foster care system, I mean, they have had been either removed from their family or the bio parents, or they have an open case with child welfare. So oftentimes there's neglect. There's instances of abuse, either physical or emotional, or even sexual. Sometimes the parents are the ones that kind of have a lot of issues themselves, whether it was substance abuse, domestic violence, like you mentioned. We've also seen youth that have been victims of sex trafficking. So really kind of tough stuff, I mean, there are certain, like, talking about sex trafficking directly, like when I first got my first case that was a victim of sex trafficking, kind of like blew my mind because it was like, something that you think about happens over in like Eastern Europe or like Southeast
Overseas,
Asia or
yeah.
whatever too. You don't really think about that happening here, but in our own backyards, Long Beach, Hollywood, Pomona, that stuff is happening in our own backyards.
Yeah.
And what do you recommend to people that can be in that situation to kind of either get out of it or escalate? Or how do they, red flags that they should look out for?
Yeah, it's a really complex issue. It's one of those things where I'm still learning about it. I mean, there are really good agencies, luckily, in our area that provide a lot of direct services to them. That could probably, I could link you guys to, and they'll speak more about that. But I think just in digging deeper and realizing how much it's so complicated. It's not like someone gets kidnapped in the van and then forced into doing that kind of stuff. I mean, these are young, not just girls and boys that have had really tough childhoods. And then the predators or the pimps, they recognize that, hey, they're looking for love. So they'll, they know where the group homes are. They know where they go after school, and they'll go there and be like, hey, you want to go shopping? And it's almost like by meeting, a certain immediate need, whether it be like taking them out to get new clothes or taking them out to eat. And then, those kids, like they experience love for the first time, or what they think is love.
Yeah.
And then over time, that's slowly kind of groomed them. And then next thing you know, they're like, oh, if you really do care for me or love me, you'll do this for me. And it's almost like, it's just kind of a slippery slope and kind of happens. So it's not even like
instant.
Yeah.
Well, that brings a lot of awareness, because I think sometimes we don't even know what's going to happen. And again, these people have gone through something or their parents have, and it kind of goes genetics, into them as well, right? What do you have to say, Connie? This is some tough information.
It's for me, I think it's kind of hard for me to swallow right now because I get very sensitive with the topic of like sexual abuse and stuff like that. Although I'm not a victim of anything, I am definitely like, I would like kill someone if they were hurt a child type of thing, especially in that way of sex trafficking and sexual matters. So for me, just listening to you right now, Luwin, it kind of just hits a different string in myself where I'm really just trying to listen intently. But also another question, I guess, that could follow up from it is that, especially during COVID-19, people had to stay home. Kids had to be locked up. I don't know their situations at home. Sometimes they are going through really, bad mental, physical, emotional abuse with their parents, uncles, grandparents. I don't know. Had you seen a rise in cases of such during the pandemic?
Yeah, I've heard of a rise, in reports. It's one of those things where I think that you bring up a really good point, is that with COVID-19 and the pandemic and things closing, a big thing that closed was schools. And it's unfortunate, but in a lot of ways, sometimes for these children where they have such a rough environment at home, I've seen that like the school becomes their refuge, right? It kind of becomes their escape. The school also serves as another place of potential safety because teachers, school staff, they're mandated reporters. So if they notice any red flags or, potential abuse, they would have to report it too.
Correct.
But you take that away, it's almost like, the kids that were at risk might be even more at risk because they lost that kind of.
And had you also seen any rise in the suicide rate as well?
I think I've definitely seen a rise in like just mental health issues.
Mental health, okay.
In general, I think just being cooped up.
Yeah.
Not being able to access a lot of the enjoyable coping skills that people might otherwise tend to.
Mm-hmm.
Things like being outside, socializing. I think that was huge. I think, for kids.
That's how they build their identity in a way, right?
Yeah, actually. And that leads to our next topic, right? Just finding, especially for young adults and just adolescents in general, finding their identity. And during COVID-19 has obviously suppressed that, if anything, because you're just locked up in a controlled environment by the adults in the household. And
their stress kind of bounces off of your stress. And
right?
Can you imagine what these people are going through? Even if they don't have mental health, I mean, everyone experienced a little bit of their taste, what they go through on a daily basis. Right.
So in your position, how do you help these kids how do you build them back up, I guess? Because obviously you're dealing with kids who've literally been torn down to pieces that haven't even been able to even become even a fraction of who they really are.
Right.
And in your position and just therapists in general, right? How do you guys relate and how do you guys even build these kids back up?
I think first and foremost, it's about building that relationship. You build that trusting relationship because I think these youth that have experienced a lot of trauma, they're very guarded, and rightfully so. I mean, there have been people in their lives that time and time again have either let them down or hurt them. So, and then there have probably been a bunch of people that have come in and said, hey, I want to help you. And then let's say they move placements or they move schools or whatever too. And, that relationship was short-lived. So a large part of it is just building that trust, and you do that informally. You do that not just in sitting in a therapy session, hey, talk to me, right? You do that in things like activities. I mean, and that's one thing that was really tough for COVID because I love to be creative. And there'll be times I took the kids out to the community, we'd play basketball or just kind of capitalizing on their strengths. There was one kid whose dream was to be a rapper.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually got him some studio time, in a studio, and he was able to do a little recording thing, and you could just see his face light up.
Yeah.
So like things like that, like, it was really tough last year with everything closed. It's almost like we're really, really like hands are tied. I wish that we could do this.
Yeah.
And my plea to them was just like, we'll get through this. And when things kind of open up again, like, hey, we're going to hit the ground running and have some fun. So I think building that relationship first, getting them to trust you, and then, just kind of investing in them in terms of just showing up.
Yeah.
That sometimes it's not even about what words to say or, what like books to recommend or whatnot. Too.
Yeah.
It's just about being consistent. They're saying like, hey, you're showing up when I need you, when I call, when I want to talk.
You're there. You're that person for them that they can find stability in this chaos where they live, right? Because sometimes we think that's such a little role that, oh, if we don't go, it's okay for them, they'll be fine.
Right.
But you find that balance that you created for them. That's amazing, Luwin. Thank you for doing that for all the community that you're helping, because it's also, I can't imagine the toll that it takes on you and how you find your own balance, So how do you do that?
Yeah. How do you separate your emotion? Like, I'm pretty sure you get emotionally attached to these kids too. And I'm pretty sure, at home, like, does it ever overlap at that point where you just either get so stressed from work, you take it out on your family? Like, you know what I mean? I'm trying to understand, how do you genuinely separate your emotions from your job and from personal life then?
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate because the way that my specific program is set up is that I have two really great team members that I talk to every day. Like, we're on group text and phone calls every day. So you're not just in it by yourself. You're able to like, hey, I'm feeling this sort of way about this. How do you guys feel? And you're almost like sharing in that mission together. I think having good supervisors and good bosses is really important too. But I think just personally, over the years, I've learned to kind of just, when I get home, I also remind myself of the fact that like, hey, I tried my best today. I did all I could.
Giving it your all.
Yeah. And then it's almost like you got to let it go. I sometimes like the first thing I do when I come home is like take a shower, almost like to wash off the day, reset, and be there for, my own family, my own loved ones and whatnot too. So almost like creating that separation. It doesn't mean that you stop caring. I think that was for when I first started in this field. I think I was overextending myself a little bit to a point where I found myself like thinking about the people I work with, having dreams about them, all the time. And it's almost like, okay, this is like a little bit
extreme,
right? And it's almost like, if I'm not healthy, then how am I going to help others, right? Correct. So it doesn't mean, I've come to really accept the fact that just because I shut it off when I'm home doesn't mean that I stop caring for them. It just also means that, hey, I'm going to refuel myself so that way I'm better able to care for them.
Correct. Wow.
That's beautiful, Luwin. I think you really do lead your life with impact, and how, you carry these people with you. And I feel like everyone that you talk to, you make them feel comfortable and warm, and that they can open up to you pretty easily.
Would you say within your program and versus just others in comparison, or at least, let me see, how does your team and your program compare to others in the county, in the state and stuff? Because, we've seen things like on Netflix, like Gabriel Zamora. I don't know if you guys remember that that one.
Yeah, it was a pretty strong.
How is it that there's certain therapists and social workers out there that just miss these red flags? Like, how do we get to where we get? How do we better these programs that aren't as successful as yours? Let's just say, that it can get to that level where these kids are getting the treatments and just the resources that they need. Like, what is it that we're missing? Is it just funding? Like, I don't know.
It's a complex thing, I'm sure funding is part of it too. But the really cool thing about our program is that we're meeting them where they are. I think oftentimes with mental health services, or just a lot of services in general, like medical services, right? What do you do when you fall ill or you're not feeling well? You have to go to the doctor's office, right? But what if, probably almost all of the families that we work with are low income in low socioeconomic areas. They might not have transportation. Mom and dad might be working. How do you expect them to access services when they really can't? So it's
They're
almost
limited.
And you're setting up all these, not you're setting up, but there are these barriers.
Yeah.
For them to access services. So I think the neat thing about us being field-based is we bring our services to them. We're meeting them in their homes, we're meeting them in their schools, we're meeting them in their communities. So we're going down to them to make sure that those services are accessible.
And you're on call, right? For the whole day. So that's a unique thing that Foothill has as well, right?
Oh, this is not like everything. This is not like everybody that does that. It's not 24 hours for every like clinic or stuff out there.
No, just our specific program. we're on call 24/7 because the kids that we're dealing with are really at risk.
I see.
So we are on call 24/7. Excuse me.
No worries.
For mental health emergencies. And I think sometimes it's one of those things where emergency doesn't come to a point of like, we have to, they end up in the hospital or whatnot too. They might just be having a moment where they're, freaking out, or they just need someone to talk to. And oftentimes it's about like knowing that, hey, my therapist or my team is accessible. I can give them a call and they could talk me down or kind of remind me to use my coping skills and kind of.
What can you say to people, young adults, that are going through a very hard time being at home or just overall having mental breakdowns? What could be at least a first step for them to kind of control when they have these, let's just say, manic episodes? And I don't know. Well, I don't even know what you would call it per se, but I do know people who literally lose their mind, let's just say, and they just, I don't know, at that point, I know the brain and everything is out of equilibrium, but how do you bring yourself back down so that you can at least control and be like, okay, everything's going to be okay though. Like, I don't know if it's just after what your external environment has already done to that person has really traumatized them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you could, if you could say something to somebody who's going through this on their own, not having the resources or not even wanting to ask for help because they just feel like, what's the point? I mean, what can you say to them? Or what could you advise at least?
Yeah, I think that the important thing is almost like building up your toolkit during times when you're not in that state. So that way, when you get into that state, like what might work for me, or I've already built up that toolkit. And when I say toolkit, it's kind of like just a general term in terms of like, it could be like just one person that, you feel comfortable talking to, or it could be, figuring out what works for you. Like in terms of, I had one kid literally like he had his favorite YouTube video and we figured that out. And so when he started acting out, we directed the caregiver to play that YouTube video, and instantly that kid was like direct, eyes on the YouTube video. You could see almost like his body just kind of calming down.
At rest. Wow.
Right. And we figured that out not because we're trying different YouTube videos when he's acting out, but because, we paid attention during the times, he was calm and engaged and whatnot too. So it's almost like, hopefully you have that space and time when, you're able to kind of dive a little bit deep and, figure out, hey, what's going to work for me?
Yeah. I think that's kind of what I had to do at some point too. I mean, I think breathing, taking deep breaths for me, right? I don't know if it's like that for you or for any of you guys. If you guys ever have like those like moments where you're just like, oh, I'm just like, I don't know. You're
That's
just
one
so
thing
mad.
it changes in your moods. Whenever, if you're happy, your breath changes. If you're sad, it changes. I don't know if you've noticed that, but it starts, once the adrenaline starts running, what happens? Your breath, you start breathing fast. So I did remember a therapist mentioning like belly breaths to the little kids, right? You're like, hey, breathe, make sure this happens. And you can control your anger and stuff like that. And so that's another thing that I'm sure you taught your kids, right?
Yeah,
little kiddos.
The belly breaths or counting backwards,
to focus on something, right? I remember, or like a scent, or focus on like 5 things.
Yes, it could be like a scent or a color. I had one gal whose her favorite color was yellow. I was like, oh, awesome, because yellow is like happiness, right? So I was like, built a little like box of just different things that were yellow, like a picture of a flower or like a sun or whatnot too. And she went into her little box when she was feeling like she needed some support.
How old was she?
She was like 9.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow. I think you're really helping these kids build an identity, because no one probably even pays attention to the little things that you see, like that YouTube video. Probably the caregiver that takes care of them on a daily basis didn't even notice that they needed someone from the outside to come in and teach them. And I think that's something else that brings to the table when you need it. It was there for me, and it's there for all the community, and it's free. Isn't that amazing?
Wow. Oh yeah, it's free too, huh?
Yeah, it's free.
Oh my gosh. And guys, we will make sure we'll link everything down below when it comes to resources. Luwin, I'm just so like dumbfounded right now, just because I think growing up for me, as much as I grew up in a low income family, I do feel like I was sheltered in a lot of ways. Very protected. Typical Asian family too, where it's like, you can't go here, you can't go there. So just what really goes on, like you said, it could happen in your backyard, with kids being abused.
Or what they
It's
watch nowadays
or
too.
that too, but like I'm just really, my body is shocked, I guess. That's that naive part of me, right? Where it's like, wow, like this really does happen in the community. And it makes my heart sad in a lot of ways, actually. But to know that there's resources like you guys, that you guys are able to go out on the field, go help these kids. I just hope that people who are listening, know that there's resources like this too, because I know half the time, when we're in our own feelings or when we don't know what the heck is going on with ourselves and we take it out on people, we forget too that this affects the children, right? This
It's a chain reaction.
Yeah. And I'm starting to kind of see that, like, hopefully in the future now, if I have kids, like, okay, always try to take myself out of the situation and really, I guess I really want to protect my kids too, by not really exposing them to like crazy things, whether it's like arguing.
How you were brought up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just going in my head right now.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just really surprised, but I'm really happy to know that there's people like you that see things from an outside perspective, knowing that, hey, there's different ways to control, the way you feel when you're upset. Yes, everyone's situation may be very different, domestically speaking. But within yourself, and even if you can't have any resources or you don't know any resources that you can access to, like, there's always still something they could do for yourself too, right? If hey, when you're happy and you notice, like you said, yellow makes you happy, collect some things in a little box that are yellow, because it'll always remind you the happy thoughts when you're in the worst place, maybe.
Yeah. And you brought up a really good point. I think, our upbringing shapes a lot of how we are, who we are, and how we deal with things, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I laugh sometimes of how I ended up being in this field, because I grew up growing up in a household where your feelings weren't hurt. Like, we were an immigrant family. I was born in Hong Kong. I moved here when I was 5 with my family. And it was one of those things where, like, so much focus is on just the doing, right? Be a good boy,
Yes.
Get good grades,
Yeah.
Behave. It wasn't about feelings.
Never
About feelings, right? So it was almost like, sometimes I laugh. I'm just like, how did I end up here where, like, I'm in this field where it's like so much focus is on
feeling.
Yeah. When Amy told me, she's like, hey, I spoke to Luwin, he does this, he does that. And I was like, what is he? And she goes, he's Chinese. I'm like, what? But like you said, it's
rare.
very odd. It's very rare to see our like our people, in a sense, like the Chinese and Asian culture, to really be a part of social work, because it is very rare, because the families, or at least their parents, expect us to be doctors, in medicine specifically, more so, but mental health is definitely, it's if you being a part of that is definitely helping the world, right? Mental health, more than ever, I think, has always mental illness and health has always existed. It's just now that we're shedding so much more light on it now to realize, hey, like, if you don't have your health, even mental health, you have nothing too.
Right. And it's neat because I'm able to draw from my personal experiences in my work. When a kiddo that I'm working with is dealing with things like, their identity, cultural, there might be dealing with bullying, being made fun of at school. I can click back and think, hey, I can share a story about when I was in elementary school. My mom and my dad would pack me lunch, and I was like, oh my gosh, why can't I just buy school lunch like normal people, right? Why you gotta pack me stuff? And then I opened up my lunchbox, and inside was a Tupperware of rice, a Tupperware of meat, a Tupperware of veggies, and then like soy milk. I was like, oh man, seriously. Like, so I closed up my lunchbox and I wouldn't eat because I was worried about being made fun of. And then I remember one time we're at the store, I was like, not yelling, but I was like, Mom and Dad, like, why can't you just buy me like a Lunchables? Like,
regular food.
So my mom, bless her heart, I think she was trying to be open-minded. She bought me a Lunchables, right? So the next day I was so like happy, excited. I was like, took out my lunch bag. I was like, I'm going to show my lunch. Like everyone watched, like, make sure you see that I have Lunchables, right? I opened it, I'm eating, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm eating cold meat, cheese, and crackers. I'm like, so even though on the outside, I felt all cool and,
like
and
the
happy and stuff,
and
there's a part inside, I'm like, this is junk.
This is trash, right?
Yeah. And then you become grateful for what you did have before. So if it wasn't for that Lunchables, you still would have felt that particular way about your mom's cooking.
Right. So it's almost like honestly, there was a period of time when I like really, had an internal conflict. I knew that I was Asian. I knew that I was Chinese, but I didn't want to be. I think it depended on where you grew up. I grew up in North Pasadena. where the elementary school I went to was mostly white. And then when I went to 6th grade, it was like mostly African-American, mostly Black. So there were times when I would like yell at my parents and be like, why did you make me Chinese? As if, looking back, as if they had a choice, right? But like, you know.
And there is a rise in that now too, right?
Well,
did you see that?
Yeah, well, growing up, were you picked on and bullied because you were Chinese?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think yeah, bullying I think has been around. It's nothing new. You know, I think, you know, they see you, and they'll be like, you know, they'll do the eyes thing. You know, they'll be like ching ching chong chong, you know, that kind of stuff. Or like, do you know kung fu?
Yeah.
You know, and that kind of stuff too. So yeah, definitely, you know, was bullied about that. And it's almost like it was a norm. So that's a sad part of it, that it didn't stick out. Like, hey, I'm being bullied.
Yeah.
You know, it just seems so commonplace.
Yeah, it was just more like you just gotta toughen up. Like your feelings don't matter
Tough
anyway.
love,
So just kind of mind your own business too, right? You kind of just let that. You're supposed to let that just
fly over
your
head,
head and let it be. And I guess that leads to the whole thing with even today's current events, with the whole anti-hate, you know, anti-Asian hate and all that stuff. Like, have you seen a rise in patients at least? Like, are they dealing with any mental health in regards to these incidences?
I think, you know, for me being in this field where most of the families I work with are either Latino or Black, I haven't in my work, but it's definitely affected like personal like circles, you know, in terms of like just, I have elderly parents in their 70s, you know, that live in Amani, and I tell them like, watch out, you know, just be careful when you go out to the park and that kind of stuff, like things that you shouldn't have to say. It's almost like we have to say now.
I know, and
you know?
and that definitely it's triggering. I think my dad actually, you know, I'm gonna bring it up. Last week, I don't think he realized it, but I think he realizes now he was targeted. He was just going to the bank, and I think it was out in Alhambra, and he had seen a gentleman, mask on, you know, whatever, hanging around the cars. He was there when he got to the bank. Okay, goes into the bank, comes back out, realizes, okay, the guy's still there, whatever. I think what had happened was that gentleman came up to my dad's car and hit it, but tried to play it off as if like my dad had run into him, when my dad was like, I was nowhere near this guy. He literally jumped towards me. And I think, you know, with a lot of robberies and things like that now too, I think that was gonna happen. But fortunately, my dad was like, I'm not even gonna, but you know, I'm not gonna even just play this game. I'm just gonna drive off, because what's the point? You know, because he already knew where he used to, what he did not do, and he just left. And then I think when he brought it up to us as kids, telling us what had happened, you know, we're kind of like, this sounds like one of those moments now, like, holy crap, this is literally happening to my own family. And it kind of like really, now that I'm bringing it up, I'm kind of like getting a little teary-eyed about it. But like you said, you didn't ever think you had to say that to your family, and you didn't think today, 2021, it was going to be like this. But besides just the whole anti-Asian hate, so even with, you know, the whole Black Lives Matters and stuff too, how do you deal with patient? Do you call them patients, clients? Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. How do you deal with clients? Like you said, because you are dealing with more like the Latino and the Black community. I mean, do you see a lot of inequalities?
You definitely do. And I think being out there in the neighborhoods, especially, I try to create conversation. You know, I think approaching it from a sense of like, you know, they call it cultural humility, you know, cultural like humbleness, where it's almost like, hey, I recognize that I'm not from your culture. Tell me about it. You know, I think sometimes like we jump to automatically try to like relate or identify, and which I think comes from a place of well-intentioned.
Yeah.
You know, they might say like, oh, I had a Black best friend in high school. It's almost like, hey, let me try to figure out a way to like relate. So I think it comes from well-intentions, but I think taking it a step further, it's beautiful when it's almost like, hey, like, tell me about your culture. And this happens on an individual level or a family level, right? Just because family A is Black doesn't mean that they have the same culture as family B, who's also Black. You know, there's also like individual family culture, religious,
that shape their lives.
Exactly. So it's really fun for me. Like I consider it a privilege, you know, and I tell the families this, I tell them like, I don't take my job lightly. Like, when you're letting me come into your home, into your lives, it's a privilege for me.
Yeah.
So when I'm in South LA, Compton, just yesterday, I was in Compton, and the family's an older Black lady, and she's just like mama bear, right? Everyone in the community goes to that house. The kids, in the community go there, jump on the trampoline, play ball, whatever. She feeds them, that kind of stuff too. She offered me a chili dog, and my first thought was like, let me decline it because I'm there to see the kid. It's kind of, you're offering me a chili dog. But I thought more about it, and it's like, for them, food is such a big part of their culture.
Yeah.
Her role in providing food for all her guests is big in her quote unquote culture, right? So I said, yeah, I'd love one.
Mm-hmm.
So I sat down and we chatted and ate and whatnot too. So it's like, even those informal moments, and then she told me about, stuff that she's gone on in life and that kind of stuff.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Like stuff like that, so it's opportunity to have discussions about what's going on, how it impacts them, because, how it impacts, just because they're Black doesn't mean, hey, I'm impacted in the same way by what's going on out there in the world as someone else.
Yeah. And within those other cultures, what have you learned, you would say?
A lot of like underlying like threads that are really common, for example, like how strong the family and the community is.
Mm-hmm.
You'll see time and time again where like it's a multi-generational household, right? Grandparents,
and we're seeing that more
kids,
and more, right?
Grandparents, grandkids and that kind of stuff too. Just their love of each other, how strong family is, how strong community is, and how like parents or just different generations really do want the best for their kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful thing that, I think a lot of generations have and all want. And going back to that, and the kids that you're dealing with, and you have the privilege to be with, how does that shape them? Because, they can be an American, get a kid into a Mexican household. To them, the food's different. Everything's different. Their whole culture is different. So what do you recommend, or what goes through their head, Luwin? Do you know? Do you get them to that?
It's funny that you say that, because a lot of times, like with kids in the foster care system, so they don't get to choose the foster family that they go to, right? So you can have a Hispanic kid end up being placed or moved around, and they end up in a Black family. I've had a really lot of good experiences with that, where the caregivers really take time to respect that kid's cultural identity. And then sometimes even go as far as to make efforts to like, hey, let's make sure we celebrate your culture's customs, your culture's holidays and whatnot too. Nice. So at the same time too, that kiddo gets to experience a new culture too. Yeah. They get to go to a Black church. They get to,
all that. It sounds like it's good too, because it really is a melting pot and appreciating each other's cultures. You said cultural humility, right?
Cultural humility.
That's a term I've never heard before. I like that. I like that though. It says it means what it says,
Wow, Luwin.
And this is such a prime place. Like, I think it's so funny because, so little side story about me is, before grad school, I actually took a few years off and I was a flight attendant. And I remember traveling, and when people asked me I was from LA, there was one time this guy asked me, "Where are you from?" I said LA, and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And I was like, my first thought was like, why are you sorry?
Yeah.
Like LA, we're so lucky, to have such a wide exposure to different cultures, different foods.
That's what I'm thinking.
Right? Literally, like if whatever food you want, you look it up, LA has it.
Yep.
You think about like other places, you'll be like, there might be one Asian restaurant in town, and they serve teriyaki and that's it, right? So it's one of those things where like, like LA gets a bad rep, but like, you know what? We're so blessed.
Why? Why? I'm still trying to figure out why you guys sorry we're from LA. I love it here. SGB all the way, man. All the dim sum, the pho, everything.
And then you want Mexicans around the corner.
And you got tacos, man. You got your street vendors, supportive street vendors too. Oh my gosh.
He was just ignorant, didn't know what he was talking about. And we, crazy to say that we project that out there, right? Our own stuff, what we believe in, we want other people to believe in. We just have to be open-minded at the end of the day to other people's beliefs and cultures, And
so even though you're dealing with a lot of kids in the more Hispanic and Black communities, Do they have a certain perspective on Asians? Since, with the current events and everything, I'm just wondering now.
There's some rowdy ones that would, right off the bat be like, "Are you Chinese?" That kind of stuff. And yeah, they do. They have, I think, certain preconceived notions. There's confusion about, hey, how do you tell the difference between Korean, Japanese, Chinese, or other Asians and that kind of stuff? There are some that make fun of me still. Like, I think because they do that to almost like test you to see like what can I get away with? How far can I take this? Right? Is he gonna leave? And I almost like, so I take it in stride while also kind of just redirecting them in a very like nice way.
Yeah.
I don't like it to be like.
But is it just because they truly haven't been exposed to the different cultures in that sense, or genuinely they have this deep level of like misunderstanding and hate that that they think what they think is right about other races?
Yeah, I think it's a lack of exposure and also what the media has portrayed. I'm really happy to see things start, are changing a lot. But growing up, I mean, you watch movies, right? When do you ever see the hero of a movie being an Asian person, right? Usually the Asian people are computer, like the IT, the nerds, one, they're never like the hero, right? They never get the girl. They're never like portrayed as like the romantic, sexy,
yes,
and whatnot too. So it's almost like, the media coverage, right, kind of perpetuates those stereotypes that we're quiet, meek, shy, smart, nerdy.
Yeah. Well, that's not bad though. I mean, look at the brains. I mean, that's cool too, Right? But we are definitely seeing those barriers being broken. I mean, obviously I feel like what's going on with the world right now, a lot more bad is happening than good. But in order for the good to come out, things have to get worse in a sense.
It has to be brought up to light in a sense. And people need to step up also when we see those hate crimes and, just know that the baby steps that you take in that very moment can impact their life in a greater way.
Yeah. And do you feel like with parents, and their children that they really become not just influenced, but
they mold them. They mold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But more like, are kids really that easily manipulated by, the people that they trust, like their parents, where, that they can be, I don't want to sound all messed up, but like as twisted as their parents, let's just say if they have those preconceived notions about certain cultures, certain races per se. Do you feel like truly in the household is what really affects a child's upbringing and how they see life?
I think it has a huge part in it. I think we had, I liken kids to be like sponges, right? They absorb everything.
Yeah.
Even when you're not talking to them, they're watching, right? They're watching everything you do, say. So they're just like sponges, So it's one of those things where a lot of, habits, values are passed down, in the household. I think that's where it kind of, has to start. Yeah.
Wow, Luwin. And what are some baby steps that you would recommend that can help better mold a person and their mental health and how to even identify, what they're feeling?
I think steps just to know that like you make an impact. It doesn't have to be a grand gesture, but like, you're a representation of not just yourself, but like all that you identify with. And if someone, has a good interaction with you or is blessed by you, they might think back and say like, hey, I remember one time this Asian gal, let me open the door for me or whatnot too. So it's almost like just remembering that like, every interaction you have is an opportunity for you to impact someone,
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to sit on that for a little bit, guys.
Yeah, it's like doing the next right thing is something that we should all be thinking about, right? In our daily life is just, keep thinking about the positive. And just because the person before you honked at you doesn't mean you need to honk at the other person, because think about their day and what they're going through and kind of humble yourself into, okay, maybe they're having a bad day. I need to just calm down and be the smile for them. You know, be that little change that can brighten their day. Be that little yellow flower for them.
Right. And I think I've learned this through just my life and this work, is because change doesn't come in an instant. You know, there might be times I don't see the fruits of our
Your
labor,
yeah.
right? Like, you know, like let's say I have this, you know, kiddo I'm working with for a year or two. Yeah, they make small changes, but you don't really, you know, see the development, you know, with them. And all you can hope for is just like, hey, I'm planting seeds. And then one day they're just going to you know, they're just going to keep watering those seeds, and then they're going to grow and blossom.
Yeah.
You know?
Man, this makes me want to be an even better person now.
Luwin is truly leading with impact. He also, you know, does a lot of giving back to the community. And Luwin, inform our viewers about how little things that they do throughout their day can impact, I know, everyone's life. You also did something with the Red Cross, right? And so how do you find time in such a busy day, being on call 24/7? How do you find that balance to still give back to the community? And why do you do it?
Yeah, how do you have energy to still give back? Period. How do you keep giving?
I ask myself that sometimes. No. So I think it sounds like counterintuitive, but giving back is actually like one of my outlets. Because you would think like you give so much for work, how do you have anything? But I think giving back in a different setting, you know, is really just a way to refresh me. I think how I kind of came across that was just thinking about like what my talents are, what my interests are, where my passion is. And one of them is just a creative outlet of photography. Like I love being a photographer and taking photos and whatnot too. And I just started like thinking like, let me look for opportunities, or maybe opportunities come and look for me in terms of how do I link those two together. So I actually started with an organization called Heart Gallery of LA. So they're tied into the Department of Children and Family Services. And what they do is they link photographers with children in foster care, and they arrange for a photo shoot. And with that photo shoot, it goes up on an online as well as a physical gallery to gain exposure for potential adopting families. So that way these kids can find their forever homes and forever families.
And these kids are older, which is harder for them to get adopted, you know, because people that adopt usually want someone smaller that they can mold. And, you know, so that's a big way of giving back.
Yeah. And it sounded so weird at first because it almost sounded like I'm helping them take pictures to put on the website to like almost like, right? But then I thought about it more and I'm kind of like, you know what, without this exposure though, sometimes these kids won't have the opportunity to find.
They get lost behind everything else or the system, right?
Right.
And I noticed one of the pictures because I was even thinking about becoming a foster mom because of the photos that Luwin brought to light.
Wow.
From these kids. And so a picture just say 1,000 words, and you know, he made them feel comfortable. They smiled. They probably didn't even know how to smile before that.
Yeah. So those, I mean, it's so funny because like, you know, as a photographer, you can have like a family hire you for family photos, and they know what they're walking into. Right? They know like, hey, this is going to go on our Christmas card. So everyone's all happy and well dressed and stuff. But it's crazy that some of these kiddos that I photographed, I mean, you can see, I'm trying to tell their story.
Yeah.
And you can see how much hurt they've been through, how they've never had the chance to put on a nice pair of pants and a dress shirt.
Yeah.
You know,
and be in that family photo.
Family photo. Yeah. So, you know, I'm so thankful that there are organizations out there that do this. And then I kind of just got linked with American Red Cross last year and became one of their photographers. So I go out to different events, and knock on wood, it's one of those things where, you know, in an event of a disaster, for example, like the Bobcat fire last year, right?
Yes.
So I think just telling the story through photographs, you know, is so important because that encourages, for example, donors to help donate to, you know, those in need. So it's one of those things where it's not so much you're exploiting the situation, but you're also just telling the story of what's need. Yeah.
Oh, those are really like totally different ways to see it, because I'm not a photographer, but when I'm looking at a photo, sometimes I'm thinking that too, like, geez, they really took photos just to like exploiting, like you said. But in fact, when the true intent was, I just need to tell this story because it needs to be known. It needs to be heard, and someone needs to see this. And I think that's just how people see life, right? There's so many different perspectives on it. But definitely always lead with a positive impact if you can in any way. And for you, that creative outlet became a positive way for you to still give back, pretty much. Man, you're always giving. I love it. This is really refreshing too in a lot of ways, because I think as time has progressed, we're seeing a lot of people really focus on themselves, right? Self-loving and all, which is great. But at some point it becomes very selfish. And when are you able to start giving back is the question. And from what you're telling me and what you're showing us, Luwin, is that, even giving back is good karma too, right? It'll always come back to you tenfold. And, good things not only come to you, but the fact that you're able to give somebody something great, something positive, whether it's just kind words, it leaves that impression. And hopefully it impacts them in the way that when they carry on their daily lives later, that they do the same, or if not, something different that makes sense to them, I guess you can say. Wow. That's really neat.
Yeah, I think it just all ties back to what we talked about earlier. Just, it doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be through a specific organization. It can literally be just a small interaction in your daily life that can make an impact, So that's, I think that's the takeaway message is kind of just love and be you and be genuine, authentic, and just be good to people.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's easier said than is it easier said than done? No, I think it's pretty easy, guys. I think it's doable. Nice. I think it's harder to be mean to people than if anything, But yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I definitely applaud you. I think that's a true role model right there, right? Where you still are able to emotionally be there for so many other people's, as well as after that, be creative in your own way that makes you happy, that still writes a story and that still contributes to, again, a better understanding or a creative way to just showcase someone's characteristics, features, aspects that captures them in the best light, pretty much. Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
Photography, you capture them in the best light. Oh, wow.
Thank you, Luwin. Thank you so much for bringing all this to light, because you do it through your photos, through your work, through how you carry yourself. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be here with us. Again,
it was a privilege and honor. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. And thank you guys for tuning in on today's Join the Journey podcast with Connie and Amy and our special guest, Luwin. And of course, as usual, we'll have everything in the description below, and we will see you guys on our next episode.
Bye.
Bye-bye.